I was a security guard blamed for a break-in until I proved it was an inside job. But that revelation came only after they'd already destroyed my life, my reputation, and everything I'd worked 12 years to build at Meridian Industries. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat across from Director Harrison's mahogany desk, watching him slide the termination papers toward me with the casual indifference of a man discarding yesterday's newspaper. His manicured fingers drummed against the leather desk pad while his eyes avoided mine, focusing instead on some invisible spot just past my left shoulder. The coward couldn't even look at me while he twisted the knife. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, the city sprawled beneath a gray October sky. 23 floors below, people moved like ants through their daily routines, unaware that up here, in this sterile corporate tomb, a man's career was being executed without trial or evidence. The papers felt heavier than they should have. Termination for gross negligence, failure to secure company premises, potential criminal liability under investigation. Each phrase was a carefully crafted dagger, designed to ensure I'd never work security again. My hands remained steady as I read, but inside something cold and calculating began to crystallize. Harrison cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the oppressive silence. His wedding ring caught the light as he gestured toward the documents, and I noticed the slight tremor in his fingers. Nervous. Good. He should be. The break-in had happened on my shift 3 nights ago. State-of-the-art security system mysteriously disabled. Surveillance cameras conveniently offline during the crucial 37-minute window. $60,000 in research equipment vanished without a trace, along with proprietary software that the company valued at 10 times that amount. I'd walked my rounds that night exactly as I had for the past 4 years. Every door checked, every alarm tested, every protocol followed to the letter. The system showed green across the board when I'd completed my 2 a.m. sweep. By 3 a.m., it was all over. But here's what Harrison didn't know as he pushed those papers across his pristine desk. I'd been watching, learning, documenting. 12 years of security work teaches you to notice patterns, anomalies, the subtle tells that separate ordinary corporate politics from something far more sinister. The tremor in Harrison's fingers wasn't just nerves about firing a long-term employee. It was the shake of a man who'd gambled everything on a single play and needed it to work perfectly. The slight discoloration under his left eye wasn't from lack of sleep. It was makeup, poorly applied, covering what looked suspiciously like the beginning of a bruise. I signed the papers without a word, each stroke of the pen deliberate and final. Harrison's relief was palpable, his shoulders dropping as he collected the documents and filed them away in his desk drawer. He thought it was over. He thought I was finished. He was wrong on both counts. The elevator descended in mechanical silence, carrying me past floors of bustling employees who would soon learn that their trusted night watchman had betrayed them all. Or so the story would go. By tomorrow, whispers would echo through every corridor, every break room, every coffee-stained conference table. Dave Martinez, the security guard who'd sold them out for a quick payday. But I'd spent 12 years in this building. 12 years watching, listening, learning the rhythm of a place that never truly slept. I knew which executives stayed late and which ones just wanted their cars to be seen in the parking lot. I knew who had access to what, when shifts changed, how the real power moved through these halls like electricity through copper wire. Most importantly, I knew that someone on the inside had orchestrated this entire operation with the precision of a master chess player. And now they'd made their first critical mistake. They'd assumed I'd simply disappear into the night, another casualty of corporate downsizing and criminal incompetence. The parking garage's concrete walls echoed with the sound of my footsteps as I walked toward my truck. Fluorescent fixtures buzzed and flickered overhead, casting intermittent shadows that danced across oil-stained pavement. My truck sat alone in the security section, surrounded by empty spaces that would soon be filled by my replacement's vehicle. I paused at the driver's door, key in hand, and looked back at the building that had been my second home for over a decade. 23 floors of glass and steel, housing everything from cutting-edge pharmaceutical research to defense contractor prototypes. Millions of dollars in assets, protected by systems that I'd helped design and implement. Systems that someone had bypassed with surgical precision. The key turned with a metallic click, and I slid behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the first try, a reliable growl that had carried me through countless midnight shifts and dawn departures. But tonight felt different. Tonight marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of something far more dangerous. I'd worked security long enough to understand the choreography of corporate theft. The break-in hadn't been the work of desperate addicts or opportunistic criminals. It had been planned, funded, and executed by professionals who understood exactly what they were taking and why it mattered. The kind of job that required inside knowledge, access codes, and precise timing. The kind of job that needed a fall guy. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I finally arrived home at 6:30. The same furniture, the same layout, the same photographs on the mantelpiece documenting a life of steady, honest work. But everything had changed in the span of a single meeting. The morning news would probably carry the story within days. Security guards suspected in major corporate theft. I sat at my kitchen table and spread out copies of every document I'd accumulated over the years. Shift schedules, access logs, maintenance records, personnel files. A dozen years of paper trails that most people would consider mundane bureaucratic noise. But patterns emerge when you know how to look. The coffee grew cold in my cup as I worked through the night, cross-referencing dates and times, tracking the subtle movements of key personnel in the weeks leading up to the break-in. Harrison's schedule showed 3 unexplained late nights in the past month. Dr. Sarah Chen, the research director whose lab had been targeted, had requested unusual equipment modifications just 2 weeks prior. And Marcus Webb, the IT security manager, had run system diagnostics that mysteriously coincided with each of those late-night sessions. Individually, these anomalies meant nothing. Collectively, they painted a picture of coordinated preparation. Someone had been planning this for months, carefully positioning the pieces for maximum impact and minimal risk. Except for one small detail they'd overlooked. The security guard they'd chosen as their scapegoat had been watching them just as carefully as they'd been watching him. Dawn broke gray and cold across the city as I finally pushed back from the table. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. More importantly, it provided a roadmap for what came next. Harrison, Chen, and Webb had orchestrated this theft with the confidence of people who believed themselves untouchable. Corporate executives operating above the law, protected by position and presumption. They were about to learn that some assumptions proved fatal. The first phase required patience and precision. I spent the following week establishing my new routine, making myself visible in all the right places at all the right times. Coffee shops near the Meridian building, the gym where several executives maintain memberships, the parking garage of Chen's downtown apartment complex. Not stalking, observing. Learning the rhythms that govern lives lived in the assumption of privacy and security. Harrison's habits were clockwork precise. Coffee from the same shop every morning at 7:45 a.m. Lunch at the same restaurant 3 days a week. Evening drinks at Morrison's Bar every Friday with the same group of middle management climbers. A man of routine, predictable, and therefore vulnerable. Chen was more interesting. Her schedule varied dramatically from day to day, but her routes remained consistent. She favored back roads over highways, preferred parking in dimly lit areas, and always carried a leather briefcase that never left her sight. The briefcase that had been conspicuously absent from her office the night of the break-in. Webb presented the greatest challenge. As IT security manager, he understood surveillance and counter-surveillance better than most. His patterns were deliberately randomized, his routes carefully varied. But everyone has tells, and Webb's was his obsession with his vintage Porsche. He spent every Saturday morning at the classic car meet in Riverside Park, surrounded by other collectors who shared his passion for German engineering and pristine chrome. By the end of the first week, I had detailed profiles of all 3 conspirators, their strengths, weaknesses, fears, and vulnerabilities. The information that would determine how justice would be served. But intelligence without action is merely academic exercise. The second phase required more direct engagement. Harrison's Friday evening ritual provided the perfect opportunity. Morrison's Bar was a classic executive watering hole, all dark wood and leather upholstery, where middle management gathered to complain about upper management and plot their ascension up the corporate ladder. I'd been there before, during the Christmas parties and retirement celebrations that punctuated corporate calendar. I arrived early, claiming a corner table with clear sight lines to Harrison's usual booth. The bartender, a grizzled veteran named Tommy who'd served drinks to 3 generations of corporate climbers, nodded in recognition as I ordered a beer and settled in to wait. Harrison arrived precisely at 6:15 p.m., flanked by his usual crew of sycophants and ladder climbers. They commandeered their regular booth and began the weekly ritual of complaining about quarterly projections and executive mandates. But tonight, Harrison seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly and glancing toward the entrance with obvious anxiety. He was expecting someone. At 6:47 p.m., Marcus Webb entered the bar. He didn't acknowledge Harrison directly, instead making his way to the bar and ordering a drink. But his positioning was deliberate. choosing a stool that provided visual contact with Harrison's booth while maintaining plausible deniability. The choreography was subtle but unmistakable. Two conspirators conducting business in plain sight, hidden by the ambient noise and alcohol-fueled obliviousness of their fellow executives. Webb's drink sat untouched as he scrolled through his phone, occasionally glancing toward Harrison's table. At 7:23 p.m., Harrison excused himself from his group and made his way toward the restroom. Webb followed 30 seconds later, timing that was too precise to be coincidental. I waited another minute before following, moving through the crowded bar with the practiced invisibility of someone accustomed to observing without being observed. The restroom was empty except for Harrison and Webb, who stood at opposite ends of the row of sinks, speaking in low, urgent tones. Their body language spoke volumes. Harrison's shoulders were tight with stress, his hands gesturing emphatically. Webb remained calm but alert, his responses measured and controlled. I entered quietly, moving to the far sink and beginning an elaborate hand-washing routine that would provide cover for extended observation. In the mirror, I could see Harrison's face clearly. The stress lines around his eyes had deepened since our termination meeting. The man was under serious pressure. Webb's reflection was harder to read, but his posture suggested someone delivering bad news or difficult instructions. He spoke briefly, his words too quiet to make out over the ambient noise from the bar, then checked his watch and moved toward the door. Harrison remained at the sinks for another 30 seconds after Webb's departure, staring at his own reflection with the hollow expression of a man questioning every decision that had brought him to this moment. When he finally left, his steps carried the weight of someone walking toward an inevitable reckoning. I gave him a 2-minute head start before returning to my table. Harrison's group was preparing to leave. Their weekly ritual concluded earlier than usual. Webb had already disappeared, his bar stool empty and his drink still untouched on the polished mahogany surface. But I'd seen enough. The meeting confirmed what the documentary evidence had suggested. This operation was ongoing, requiring continued coordination and management, which meant opportunities for intervention and disruption. The third phase began with Dr. Sarah Chen. Her laboratory occupied the entire 15th floor of the Meridian building, a shrine to cutting-edge pharmaceutical research protected by multiple layers of security. Access required biometric confirmation, encrypted key cards, and logged approval from at least 2 supervisors. The kind of protection that could only be bypassed by someone with intimate knowledge of the system's vulnerabilities. Chen's work focused on synthetic compounds with potential military applications, cognitive enhancers, stress suppressors, compounds that could give soldiers significant advantages in combat situations. The kind of research that attracted interest from foreign governments and private military contractors willing to pay astronomical sums for exclusive access. I'd learned these details during my years of routine security sweeps, cataloging information that seemed irrelevant at the time, but now provided crucial context for understanding the scope of the theft. $60,000 in equipment had been a cover story. The real prize was the research data, the formulas and synthesis protocols that represented years of classified development. Data that someone had sold to the highest bidder. Chen's apartment building was a converted warehouse in the Arts District. All exposed brick and industrial fixtures disguised as trendy urban living. Her unit was on the 7th floor, accessible through a secured entrance that relied on keycard access and a security camera system that hadn't been updated since the building's conversion. I spent 3 evenings establishing her patterns. Chen typically arrived home between 8:30 and 9 p.m., carrying her leather briefcase and a canvas bag filled with takeout containers from whatever restaurant had caught her attention that day. She parked in the underground garage, took the elevator to her floor, and rarely emerged again until the following morning. But on Thursday evening, her routine varied. Instead of heading directly home, she drove to a small office complex on the outskirts of the financial district. The building was unremarkable, housing accounting firms and insurance agencies that specialized in serving small businesses. Chen parked behind the structure and entered through a rear door, using a key rather than any electronic access system. She remained inside for 37 minutes. When she emerged, the leather briefcase was gone, replaced by a manila envelope that she handled with the careful attention of someone carrying valuable cargo. The building's directory revealed nothing obviously connected to pharmaceutical research or defense contracting, but one listing caught my attention. Meridian Consulting Services Suite 314, a name generic enough to avoid attracting attention, but specific enough to suggest corporate connections. Chen's return journey took her through a circuitous route that added 20 minutes to what should have been a direct drive home. The behavior of someone checking for surveillance, ensuring she wasn't being followed. Professional tradecraft applied by someone who understood the risks of her activities. The manila envelope never left her apartment. Friday morning brought unexpected complications. A news van was parked outside the Meridian building when I drove past during my routine surveillance sweep. Channel 7's crime reporter, a sharp-featured woman named Lisa Rodriguez, was setting up for what appeared to be a live broadcast. The story was breaking ahead of schedule. By noon, the local news websites were carrying preliminary reports. Security guard under investigation in corporate theft. Meridian Industries confirms major break-in. Police sources suggest inside knowledge required for successful heist. My photograph, pulled from company personnel files, accompanied the articles. 12 years of exemplary service reduced to a single narrative. Trusted employee turned criminal opportunist. The comment sections filled with predictable condemnations. Righteous indignation from people who'd never worked a day in private security, but somehow understood exactly how such thefts should be prevented. Harrison had accelerated the timeline, forcing the story into public consciousness before I could mount any meaningful defense. The man was smarter than I'd given him credit for, understanding that perception often matters more than evidence in determining guilt or innocence. But acceleration cuts both ways. By pushing the story public, Harrison had also committed himself to a specific narrative that would be difficult to change if contradictory evidence emerged. He'd bet everything on my silence and disappearance, gambling that a disgraced security guard would lack the resources or motivation to fight back. Another critical miscalculation. The weekend provided breathing space to refine my approach. Chen's Thursday evening destination became the focus of intensive research. Meridian Consulting Services had been incorporated just 18 months ago, listing a P.O. box as its primary address and filing minimal paperwork with state regulatory authorities. The kind of shell company designed to obscure rather than illuminate business activities. But corporate secrecy has limits, especially when someone knows how to follow paper trails through multiple jurisdictions. A shell company requires banking relationships, registered agents, and tax filings that create breadcrumbs for patient investigators. Meridian Consulting's registered agent was a corporate service provider that specialized in helping businesses maintain privacy and reduce regulatory overhead. For a fee, they would serve as the official representative for companies that preferred to keep their actual ownership and operations confidential. The bank account required more creative investigation. Chen's Thursday evening routine suggested regular transactions, the kind of ongoing relationship that would generate electronic records and paper trails. Most small office buildings in that district were managed by property companies that required corporate tenants to provide detailed financial information as part of their lease agreements. By Monday morning, I had the name of the property management company and a plan for acquiring the information I needed. The plan required skills I developed during my military service, years before my transition to private security: electronic surveillance, social engineering, and patient infiltration of target organizations. Skills that civilian employment had kept dormant but not eliminated. Apex Property Management occupied a narrow storefront between a dry cleaner and a Vietnamese restaurant. The kind of operation that survived on thin margins and high volume, managing dozens of small commercial properties for absentee landlords who preferred passive income to active involvement. Their security was appropriately minimal. A single receptionist monitored visitors during business hours, while evenings and weekends were protected by a basic alarm system and locked doors that wouldn't challenge a determined intruder with relevant experience. I entered through the rear service entrance at 11:30 p.m. on Monday, using techniques that would leave no evidence of unauthorized access. The tenant files were stored in metal cabinets that had protected documents since the Carter administration, secured with locks that were more psychological deterrent than physical barrier. Meridian Consulting Services had signed a 2-year lease agreement 8 months ago, providing references and financial documentation that painted a picture of steady, legitimate business operations. But the bank account information revealed a more complex reality. Monthly deposits ranged from $15,000 to $47,000, amounts that suggested either highly lucrative consulting work or income from less traditional sources. The deposit schedule was irregular, but showed clear spikes that coincided with specific dates over the past 6 months. Dates that matched Chen's Thursday evening visits. The banking information provided the missing piece of the operational puzzle. Chen wasn't just stealing research data, she was running a sophisticated intelligence operation that converted classified pharmaceutical research into cash payments from unknown buyers. Meridian Consulting Services was the financial mechanism that laundered the proceeds and obscured the paper trail. But every financial crime leaves electronic footprints, and I now knew where to look for them. Tuesday morning brought another media development. Channel 7's investigative team had obtained security footage from a nearby building that showed someone matching my description in the area during the time of the break-in. The video was grainy and indistinct, but it provided enough visual evidence to support the narrative of my involvement. The footage was genuine, showing me during my regular patrol route, but the timestamp had been subtly altered, shifting my presence from before the break-in to during the critical 37-minute window when the theft occurred. Professional-level video editing that required expensive software and considerable expertise. Webb's handiwork, almost certainly. As IT security manager, he had access to the building's surveillance system and the technical knowledge necessary to make such modifications appear authentic. The kind of evidence that would convince a jury while remaining virtually undetectable to anyone lacking his specialized skills. But digital manipulation creates its own forensic signature. Microscopic artifacts that reveal the truth to investigators who know where to look. Webb had made the footage more convincing while simultaneously providing proof of the conspiracy's sophistication and insider access. The altered video was simultaneously my biggest problem and my strongest evidence. Wednesday evening marked the beginning of the fourth phase, direct action. Webb's Saturday morning routine at the Classic Car Meet in Riverside Park provided the perfect venue for initial contact. Among vintage Porsches and restored Corvettes, surrounded by enthusiasts who shared his passion for automotive excellence, he would be relaxed and off guard. I arrived early, surveying the layout and establishing optimal positioning for what would appear to be a chance encounter. Webb's silver Porsche was easily identifiable, its pristine condition and meticulous restoration standing out even among the other exceptional vehicles. He arrived at precisely 9:15 a.m., parking in his usual spot near the main pavilion. His routine was predictable. 15 minutes inspecting his car's condition, followed by a walking tour of the other vehicles, engaging in technical discussions with fellow collectors about engine specifications and restoration techniques. I intercepted him near a stunning 1967 Mustang, timing my approach to coincide with his detailed examination of the car's interior modifications. Close enough for conversation, but surrounded by enough people to make any aggressive response inadvisable. Webb recognized me immediately, his body language shifting from relaxed enthusiasm to wary alertness. He understood that my presence was neither coincidental nor benign, but the public setting limited his options for response. I began by complimenting his Porsche, launching into a detailed discussion of its technical specifications and restoration history. To casual observers, we appeared to be two car enthusiasts sharing a mutual passion. But beneath the surface conversation, a more dangerous exchange was taking place. Webb's responses were carefully controlled, his words chosen to avoid any admission or acknowledgement of our shared history. But his eyes revealed a different story. The man was calculating, evaluating, trying to determine how much I knew and what I planned to do with that knowledge. I let him wonder for exactly 12 minutes, maintaining the facade of automotive discussion while establishing psychological pressure. Then I mentioned the altered security footage, describing the technical sophistication required for such convincing digital manipulation. Webb's reaction was microscopic but unmistakable, a slight tightening around the eyes, an almost imperceptible shift in posture. He understood that I wasn't just another disgraced security guard ranting about conspiracy theories. I knew details that only someone with inside knowledge could possess. The conversation continued for another 8 minutes, covering carburetor specifications and transmission modifications, while engaging in a parallel discussion about professional integrity and the consequences of betraying trust. By the time I walked away, Webb understood that his carefully constructed plan was beginning to unravel. He also understood that I possessed evidence capable of destroying him. Thursday brought Chen's regular evening visit to the Meridian Consulting Services office. But this time, I was positioned to observe not just her arrival and departure, but the activities that occurred during her 37-minute visits. The building's security was minimal, relying primarily on locked doors, and the assumption that nothing of value was stored in what appeared to be routine commercial spaces. The kind of assumption that proved fatal when dealing with someone who understood how to exploit such vulnerabilities. I entered through the building's service entrance 40 minutes before Chen's scheduled arrival, making my way to the third floor through darkened corridors that smelled of industrial carpet and copy machine toner. Suite 314 was located at the end of the hall, its frosted glass door marked only with the generic corporate name. The office was larger than I'd expected, containing sophisticated computer equipment and communication systems that were far more expensive than typical consulting operations would require. Multiple monitors displayed what appeared to be encrypted data streams, while military-grade communication equipment suggested connections to clients who valued security above cost. But the most revealing discovery was a wall-mounted safe, partially concealed behind a filing cabinet, but visible to anyone who knew where to look. The kind of security that protected extremely valuable documents or physical materials. Chen arrived exactly on schedule, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor as she approached the office. I retreated to a utility closet that provided visual access to the hallway, while concealing my presence from casual observation. She worked efficiently, transferring files from her leather briefcase to the computer system and uploading data that required multiple security confirmations. The process was clearly routine, performed with the confidence of someone who'd completed the same procedures dozens of times. But tonight, something was different. Chen spent additional time reviewing documents that she'd never examined before, her body language suggesting concern or confusion about their contents. She made several phone calls, speaking in urgent tones that carried through the thin office walls. When she finally emerged, her expression was troubled. The leather briefcase remained in the office, but she carried a new manila envelope that appeared heavier than previous deliveries. The weight of cash, most likely. Payment for services rendered, but at a level that suggested either increased compensation or final settlement. Chen's nervousness during the Thursday evening transaction provided the leverage I needed for the next phase of the operation. Fear makes people careless, and carelessness creates opportunities for exploitation. Friday morning surveillance confirmed my suspicions. Chen arrived at work 30 minutes early, her usual professional composure replaced by obvious anxiety. She spent the day in closed-door meetings with Harrison and other senior executives, their discussions intense enough to attract attention from support staff throughout the building. By noon, the building was buzzing with rumors about potential layoffs, corporate restructuring, and other explanations for the unusual level of executive activity. But the real story was simpler. The conspiracy was falling apart, and the participants were scrambling to manage the damage. Harrison's decision to accelerate the public narrative had backfired. Instead of containing the story, the media attention had attracted additional scrutiny from law enforcement and corporate investigators. The kind of attention that made ongoing criminal operations extremely dangerous. Chen understood that her window for safe extraction was closing rapidly, which meant she would be taking significant risks to conclude her business before the situation became untenable. Saturday evening provided the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Chen's emergency visit to the Meridian Consulting Services office began at 8:47 p.m., nearly 4 hours earlier than her usual schedule. Her body language indicated extreme stress as she hurried through the building's entrance, carrying not just her leather briefcase, but an additional bag that suggested she was removing more than just routine documents. I was positioned in the utility closet before she arrived, having anticipated that desperation would drive her to abandon normal security protocols. The office door remained open during her activities, allowing me to observe her frantic efforts to erase digital evidence and remove physical materials. She worked for over an hour, systematically destroying files and reformatting hard drives with the thoroughness of someone who understood the consequences of leaving evidence behind. The wall safe was opened repeatedly, its contents transferred to multiple containers that she prepared for transport. But Chen made one critical error. She forgot about the backup systems. Webb had designed the office's computer network with multiple redundancies, ensuring that even catastrophic system failures wouldn't result in complete data loss. Hidden backup drives maintained copies of every transaction, every communication, every file that had passed through the system during its 18 months of operation. Backup drives that I had located and copied 3 hours before Chen began her destruction efforts. When she finally departed at 11:23 p.m., Chen believed she had successfully eliminated all evidence of her activities. The office appeared empty, its computer systems wiped clean, its physical files reduced to ash in a metal wastebasket. She was wrong. The copied backup drives contained 18 months of detailed records documenting every aspect of the intelligence operation. Client communications, payment schedules, delivery confirmations, and most importantly, the complete pharmaceutical research data that had been stolen from Meridian Industries. Evidence that would not only exonerate me, but destroy everyone involved in the conspiracy. Sunday morning was spent organizing the evidence into a comprehensive presentation that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. Financial records, communication logs, video surveillance, and digital forensics created an overwhelming case for criminal prosecution. But simple evidence wasn't enough. The conspiracy had demonstrated sophisticated capabilities and high-level connections that could potentially suppress or discredit any accusations I made. What I needed was a delivery mechanism that would ensure maximum impact while minimizing opportunities for damage control. The solution came from an unexpected source: Webb's own security protocols. As IT security manager, Webb had implemented company-wide policies requiring all suspicious activities to be reported through multiple channels simultaneously: email alerts to senior management, automated backups to secure servers, and electronic notifications to regulatory authorities created a system designed to prevent evidence from being suppressed or ignored. I would use Webb's own system to destroy him. Monday morning at 6 a.m., I activated the first phase of evidence delivery. A comprehensive email containing financial records and communication intercepts was transmitted through the company's security reporting system, automatically routing copies to Harrison, the CEO, the board of directors, and several regulatory agencies. The transmission appeared to originate from within Meridian's own network, using Webb's access credentials that I'd obtained during my investigation. To recipients, it would appear that their own IT security manager was blowing the whistle on corporate malfeasance. Phase 2 began at 6:15 a.m. with the delivery of physical evidence to Channel 7's investigative team. The altered security footage, complete with digital forensics proving its manipulation, was accompanied by documentation showing Webb's access to the video editing equipment and technical expertise required for such sophisticated deception. Phase 3 targeted law enforcement directly. Detective Sarah Morrison, who had been assigned to investigate the original break-in, received a detailed briefing package containing bank records, communication logs, and location data that tracked the conspiracy's activities over the past 18 months. By 8 a.m., the evidence had been distributed through enough channels to make suppression impossible. Even if Harrison attempted damage control, too many people now possessed information that would expose the conspiracy's full scope. The reaction was swift and devastating. Harrison's first meeting of the day was interrupted by FBI agents seeking voluntary cooperation in a federal investigation of corporate espionage. Chen found herself escorted from her laboratory by corporate security, her access credentials revoked, and her research materials seized as potential evidence. Webb discovered that his network access had been suspended pending a comprehensive audit of all systems under his control. The man who had orchestrated the digital deception now found himself trapped by the very protocols he had implemented. But the most satisfying moment came at 10:30 a.m., when Detective Morrison called to inform me that all charges were being dropped. The evidence I'd provided not only proved my innocence, but demonstrated that I'd been deliberately framed by a sophisticated criminal conspiracy. She also mentioned that the FBI was interested in discussing potential employment opportunities for someone with my investigative skills and security expertise. Tuesday's news coverage was everything I could have hoped for. Corporate espionage ring exposed at major research firm. Security guard vindicated after proving innocence. FBI arrests 3 in sophisticated intelligence operation. My photograph appeared again in the articles, but this time accompanied by descriptions of investigative brilliance and professional integrity. The man who had been portrayed as a criminal opportunist was now being praised as a determined truth seeker who had refused to accept injustice. Harrison, Chen, and Webb found themselves facing federal charges that carried potential sentences of 20 to 30 years. Their sophisticated operation, which had seemed so carefully planned and expertly executed, had collapsed in a matter of hours once the truth emerged. The final phase came Wednesday afternoon, when I was invited to return to Meridian Industries for a meeting with the new interim director. The same conference room where I'd been terminated now hosted discussions about compensation, legal protection, and potential employment opportunities. The man across the table apologized for the company's rush to judgment, acknowledging that proper investigation would have revealed the conspiracy before it could target me as a scapegoat. He spoke of institutional failures and systemic problems that had allowed such deception to flourish. I listened politely, but my mind was already focused on the future. The FBI had indeed offered employment, recognizing that my combination of security expertise and investigative skills would be valuable in combating corporate espionage and white-collar crime. Harrison, Chen, and Webb had taught me something important. Justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected, served cold with the precision of a master chef preparing a meal that will be remembered long after the last bite. Thursday morning brought one final satisfaction. The local newspaper's editorial page carried a lengthy piece about the importance of perseverance in the face of false accusations. The author praised the determination required to fight powerful interests and expose institutional corruption. The editorial concluded with a simple observation that resonated far beyond the immediate circumstances. Sometimes the system works, but only when someone refuses to let it fail. I was that someone. And for the first time in weeks, the reflection in my bathroom mirror showed a man who had reclaimed not just his reputation, but his faith in the possibility of justice. The security guard they had tried to destroy had become something far more dangerous. A man who understood that truth, properly weaponized, is more powerful than any conspiracy. Harrison learned this lesson from a federal holding cell. Chen discovered it during FBI interrogations that lasted 14 hours. Webb realized it when his sophisticated digital systems became the very evidence that proved his guilt. Justice served cold, with a precision that would be remembered long after their sentences were completed. And somewhere in a small apartment across town, a vindicated security guard smiled as he prepared for his first day as a federal investigator, knowing that some battles are worth fighting no matter how long they take to win.